So here's what our goal. We have several goals to this. One is obviously we want to get through the agenda. We'd like to get through the agenda as early as possible so that you can go out and enjoy this beautiful day before the rain comes in on the weekend, right? That's part of that. Well, that's really that's the goal. Get through the agenda effectively, efficiently, allow you time to go out to enjoy the rest of the day. Board meeting again. Except for John, who would prefer that we ask that this meeting goes till about 8. So it doesn't go to the board meeting. And I think we could convince everybody in here to support you and just say, we went late. Not that everybody wants to stay for you, but we would back you up if you wanted to help us.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Vote of confidence and support.
Make sure the door's locked.
Let's go all warm and dressed.
We ought to do welcome and introduction. I think we got a few other people in our neighbors with DHHS. And we'll start with the recently retired Curtis.
I'm Curtis Bass, I'm doing Criminal Providers Association.
I'm Ashley Young, parent.
Melissa Bear, I'm the North Carolina Association of Rehab.
Great work with the Optimum Society of North Carolina.
John Nash, with the Arts of North Carolina.
Marlon Wells with the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center.
Dan Guy with DHHS.
Steve Struck with the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities.
Kenneth Marcel with Division of Medical Assistance.
Renee Rader, Division of Medical Assistance.
Deb Goda, Division of Medical Assistance. Vivian Leon, State Operated Healthcare Facility.
Gina Williams, representing Benchmark.
Mara Williams with Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services.
Mary Short, Katie Short, parent, and I represent families with severe and profound intellectual disabilities.
Paula Cox-Fishman, and this is my sister Pinky, for whom I'm guardian.
Rose Burnett, ECPH, and Cindy's on her way, searching for parking as we speak.
They did traffic
We'll try to do a little.
director.
All right. The agenda says we did that. Review previous minutes. Do we all have previous minutes?
We sent out the meetings from meeting before last that hadn't been sent out. Did anybody have an issue with those?
Hearing none, either nobody read them or nobody has an issue. So we'll move on.
And then next week's will be coming out shortly.
If you have any issues with the minutes and you didn't read them, send them to me. All right.
Send Deb an email anyway.
Starting with community guide, and that is Kenneth, right?
Yes.
I knew we had Dave.
You open the door handle.
No.
Will be sign sheets, yes.
Thank you.
I think the sound is going to record. Gracias.
Sonata.
Right, Kenneth?
Yep, you ready?
Take it away.
Okay. So the first one we're going to go over is Community Guide. So what is Community Guide? It's a service that promotes self-determination, supports the person in making life choices, provides advocacy, identifies community opportunities, provides support to individuals and planning teams, supports individuals and families with self-direction. So that's just an overview of basically what we felt like the intent of Community Guide is and should be. So then we kind of broke it up into some buckets. And the buckets were, the first is the annual orientation, and we felt like this should be mandatory for an outside person to come in to give an orientation or to assess the person's needs as they are, as it relates to self-directions, rights, and self-determination. So basically, seeing if a person wants to start self-direction, give them added information if they would like to, then going through rights and self-determination, see if there are any needs that a community guide would be helpful, and if the family chooses to have more community guides, they could ask for that at that point. Self-determination was another bucket, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Community connections and self-directions, and self-directions would be mandatory until someone is competent, based on competence or self-direction. What we were kind of feeling like is for that annual orientation, self-determination, and self-direction, is that would be at a QP level, theoretically, and then the community connections could be done by a paraprofessional or an associate. So that was our basic thoughts on that. So why did we feel like this is important? It promotes self-determination, self-sufficiency and independence, provides advocacy, and promotes and addresses with self-direction. If we go back to the buckets, you'll see that on your definition, it's broken into kind of headers. So that general orientation, that's what we talked about, so we're thinking of having mandatory. Self-determination kind of broke down tasks that we felt like kind of made what self-determination is. And the community guide assists people with these if the person chooses to. We heard some information that we don't want to add someone else into someone's life if they don't want that person in their life. So that's why we kept that general orientation, touch base, the kind of minimum that the community guide can do. So some of those tasks are exploring possibilities related to life goals, supporting the individual making decisions that are important to them,
Right.
choice, providing education on decision-making, risk-taking, natural consequences, providing education, providing advocacy, collaborating with individuals, guidance with managing their budget, supporting the person in preparing, participating, and implementing various types of plans. So that's where the community guide can actually assist with that plan development process. Assistance with guardianship, providing education, or restoration of rights, financial legal threat. So all those kind of things. And that's what we felt like made self-determination, which is a very important concept. Then the community connections, this is what we were thinking maybe could be performed by an AP or a paraprofessional. And that's like looking at different resources within the community, determining steps. And these, of course, would be non-Medicaid services. So basically like linking to various things in the community. And then self-direction, we kind of left very similar to the older definition. And these were the tasks that a community guide can help with people who have agency or choice for employer or whatever. So that's the basis of this definition. We tried to make it flexible, be a little bit more descriptive of what tasks can be used, and then give it a foothold that's a little bit mandatory so that people will utilize the service and at least be introduced to it. Does anyone have any questions?
I think, I'm going to let Karen run. Now, is this just for the total definition? I don't want to get ahead of myself, or are you going to talk about exclusions separately?
We can go over them briefly.
I just think when I was reading these, I got membership, well, and you may have used that versus the one that we had. It seems like when you read it, it was a lot of words and it just kind of got confusing with number 2 and
Number 2.
And number 3. And so I think there was some confusion, at least a little different from the version, so I'm trying to remember because we just kind of went over this yesterday. There was a lot of words and it just didn't seem as clear to us on the phone together, but not really sure. So who could actually provide this? Like if you're a provider of services, are you able to provide this service to people you are currently serving, or would it only be other people? You know, with the agency of choice, I believe you mentioned that's the when somebody is in self-direction, right?
Right. So how it's written now is that if you're providing community guide, you wouldn't be providing it if you're providing other services. We've had discussion to kind of figure out a way to allow for community guide within the agency if you're not providing advocacy. We're trying to figure out how to write that in a way, because you wouldn't want to provide community guide and advocate against the institution.
Right. And then I guess we were talking about this definition, and I think we talked about this in the meeting when we were all together before, that the level of experience of someone providing this service, I think you touched that with the QP having to do with the self-direction and the
Right, determination.
And then I guess though, what we talked about was, even if it's at the paraprofessional level, if there are any expectations that you would have and clearly stated some that, you wouldn't want, for example, somebody who just moved to your area, nothing about the area to provide this service. And you would think that's a no-brainer and that's common sense, as we all know.
Right. So what we were thinking, what we haven't gotten to is those competencies for community guide. We are also thinking for individuals who are at the paraprofessional level now, who are doing well, how do we grandfather those in? So we're actively thinking about that.
Okay. You mean the ones that aren't QPs now?
Right.
Correct. Because they're all paraprofessionals.
Right. Another thing we'll talk about when we talk about community networking as well is that we put in a disclaimer, I believe this is in the first paragraph, that, it's not in the first paragraph, but it's basically that if you're linking to someone to a paid support that will use community transition can do that linking. You don't have to go to community guide first, have them link you, and then transition over to community transition.
All right, walk through that one example.
So, say that you were looking for a volunteer job where you would need support at the volunteer site, and you're linking to a Medicaid service in a way because you're going to do community networking. So, community networking could link you to that service. Or if you already have community networking, you're looking at a different volunteer organization, you wouldn't have to go back, get a different community guide authorization to look for it, and then another community networking could be more packaged together.
We had opened it to pull the room down a little bit.
I can hear you say.
So you can either be cool or you can hear it. And if you're choosing to hear, that's okay. So really need some care coordination or community guide for DSS navigation.
Yeah, I don't think we really talked about the DSS component.
That's where people really are lost. Yep. Now, that all my case management.
Okay.
Somebody needs to do it.
So I guess community guide could technically do this if they're promoting advocacy, collaborating with other individuals or organizations on the topic.
So I would add that as a competency.
Okay.
The one thing that causes competencies is that the more you load up on competencies, the less likely you're going to find people that are doing that. This is my opinion. One way to look at it is that providers aren't going to compete on price, but they sure as heck should be able to compete on quality. So you might be able to, in my opinion, in some ways, these things that you don't have to require certain competencies that aren't clinical competencies sometimes, because you might have a provider who chooses to specialize in one area, and then the competencies of the community guys that they hire are related to that. And that's great at thinking public benefits, but you're not going to get everything in every person. That's just a caution.
I think Carrie's question more as who performs that function.
Well, that's just
Wherever it needs to go. It's here somewhere. Okay.
I took it as being that can they, not are they competent to initially. The question is, can they do that linkages and work with DSS If the answer is yes, then the question is, are they competent to do that, or do they have the competence to do that? Again, I think if you, so how would you determine that you hire somebody as a competence to
No.
DSS?
I think there's like 5 people on North Carolina that can do that now.
Right, so you probably have no community guides.
But we need to build that up.
Right. It would obviously be something that you want to train people on, but I think, I have faith in our provider community, looking at you all sitting around here, that you will adjust to make sure that the people that you hire meet the needs of the individuals that you support. Or if they're going to find somebody else.
Or, well, if you're looking at increasing competencies and saying that, right now there are a limited number of people that can provide that level of support, then there has to be some incentive to bring more people in to provide that level of support.
Right. More business.
That's part of why the economic demand supply curve, there's still two parts of that.
It's late on a Friday, and I probably shouldn't be as quick as I was here. I think it is an important question to struggle with, is how much do you prescribe in terms of competencies in a service definition for non-clinical services, or is that something that, as long as we get operating at a level that's sustainable, it allows you to know that we have to train people to have competencies? How much do you leave that to provider agencies to respond to the market? And
The definition will go back to rate setting. And to partially answer the DSS question, when it comes to eligibility, it's care coordination, we get to other DSS benefits. I think navigating that system would be good to have the community guide do that.
Care coordination would do eligibility.
They're responsible to.
We're supposed to.
I understand what you're saying.
Well, you have to make sure that the individual is Medicaid eligible monthly. Make sure the spend down information gets to DSS. What do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, so I think my experience in the system to date is that people that know how to navigate DSS are people who have navigated it. And that's generally not QPs that work in that role. In today's MCO, it was the case managers of the past that had done that alongside me. Certainly, there was lots of people who had done that role, but I don't know. I mean, a care coordinator of today, certainly there are lots of them that were doing case management.
Those are the ones that will do it. The new ones won't.
But the new people coming into the field, they have been a QP and doing monitoring or providing, that never really did that kind of case management.
Mm-hmm.
It is a huge learning curve. So I think when you think of workforce, there's two workforces. There's parents out there, or caregivers who have navigated not just DSS, because let's face it, it's also SSI, which is a different animal, and disability determination, an equally as difficult animal, all three of which are not connected, but impact eligibility. So understanding that takes living it and breathing it, which is what happens to a person that tries to achieve it for another individual. Which I think that is a limited pool, but when you think of how do you train people you learn by doing is the way you learn that skill set.
And say that again, you thought that eligibility includes knowledge of SSI, and you mentioned something else.
More knowledge. It's disability determination, it's SSI, and it's DSS. Those systems don't actually talk to each other. They mail and snail mail letters to each other that take a long time. And so, the system doesn't seem to really track that on the time frames of all of these things. helping them go get it. It's an incredibly complicated process.
So how do we help people?
I do think care coordinators right now are it in the system. They're it. So if you don't have one of them somewhere, or a great income worker at DSS, you're pretty lost.
But if we allow people, I think what you were saying too is that you learn it through going through it. So if we allow people the opportunity to try to work with people, then that should build up that knowledge, right?
I absolutely think this would be a great thing for Community Guide to do. If the Community Guide is knowledgeable. And I think there's two ways you get, my point is there's two ways you get that knowledge. Either because you've done it as a parent, and I think that's an untapped workforce in this particular arena, completely untapped workforce, very competent already people who have lived it and done it that we don't use in our system today. And I also, not on a large scale anyway, I also think there are those former case managers, some of which are now care coordinators who know how to do it. But I can see Community Guide being a good asset if the right people were hired. At ECBH to date, that has not been our experience with people hired to do this service. They're not any better off than the consumer trying to figure out what the hell to do. On a whole scale. A few, yes, in a few agencies, true, but on a wholesale in our catchment area, that's not who got hired. It's some right out of school, 4-year degree, just barely made it QP that doesn't know anything. That got hired. And it hasn't been successful because the market drives that, just like Dave said. People don't want something that's not helpful. It's a waste of time.
It may be the rate process that we pay, how we pay.
You can't
Significant issue in terms of business law.
So somebody gets in the innovation slot. They get a letter from
phone
the
call.
MCO.
Yeah, hopefully it's a phone call. Letters.
Right. Okay, a phone call from an MCO.
Got it.
So that person has to know what to do.
Well, you would tell, I'm sure care coordinators tell them, you need to apply for Medicaid if they don't.
So you would assign them a care coordinator at that point, at the initial point of contact.
Yes. That's true at ECBH. We've only speak of our experience.
Because in some MCOs, the member services or call center does a piece of it until the actual LOC is approved. So, it varies in terms of that operational piece internally at the MCOs.
Either way.
Someone at the MCO is reaching out, be it a care coordinator or be it someone who looks like care coordination is in access. So if the individual's already on Medicaid, then it's a matter of notifying TSS. If they haven't already applied for long-term care, primarily that's going to be a child who otherwise wouldn't be Medicaid eligible. Hopefully they do. Yes. Then they have to go back to DSS and make the application process, which is either 45 days or 90 days.
Okay, so they make that application process, and then the next step is they still have to go to SSI and make an application process there. They have to do disability determination once they apply for SSI, because you can't get one without the other. So then it goes to disability determination, and that is if they already have all of the required documentation to apply for disability determination, which at the very least includes a psychological evaluation.
If you don't have Medicaid, it doesn't cover the cost of that psychological.
Then how do you pay for the psychological? And so what a rat race that becomes, because if they don't have the money, they are screwed.
Now, it's going to go back to the day they apply for Medicaid, I think.
They will go 90 days usually.
But you're rolling the dice, assuming that you're going to get taken in.
And in our current market, people have been burned on that dice because it's been ones all the way around. So they might not get retroactive, and then they ate that whole psychological eval, which psychologists already feel is underpaid. So it's very difficult to get a psychologist to take a risk on that.
Well, there's a long wait for services, so you may be going, to get the actual stuff, the evaluation
Is
stuff.
that accurate so far? And then, holy moly, throw the LOC process in on top of that. The doctor signed it, there's the clock ticking. And so all these pieces have to line up like stars to take it to the moon. It's hard to make happen. It's painful.
So we're assuming, here's what I'm assuming, is that if we wrote that as a competency set for a new guy, that none of you would be able to hire anybody, because I don't think you can find anybody.
Or, if I can make a comment, I think probably the issue that really is here is who is going to support and guide the family through it. It's not whether that person is going to know all of those details, because even those of us who have been in it for a long time, you're still learning it, you're still trying to recall the steps. But what I think families want to know is there going to be a person there that when I have a question and I'm stuck, can you at least help me to connect? And sometimes that doesn't happen, and I think it's not a competency issue always, but more, is it there to help me? Is it even going to be there?
And with the example that you're doing, this is the person, if the person's already on Medicaid, then you're using the free community guide to do this, if they're not on the waiver yet. If they're not on the waiver, I mean, it goes back to care coordination. If you're bringing somebody on, so.
Nothing's changed. You get to spend that on your age, a certain age, you have to deal with VR and benefits.
Yes, the ongoing, yes, it's that initial, how to use the definition and can, it's only going to be able to be used by individuals who are on Medicaid.
And I think going back to the experience piece, when you have providers who, if you are a provider of service that you're not providing, this piece, is there a way to say, because that's where you do have that knowledge base. If I'm not providing it to somebody we support in our service, right? But could we as providers provide it to other people that we're not providing services to? But then I guess it gets tricky, because then would they want your service?
Okay, we'll keep thinking.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, after we go through all of this process, we're seeking a better process than we have today. We want to have a process that's clear and accountable. And if those are functions that need to be performed, then there needs to be someone that's designated responsible for those functions. And then, if it's required, then somehow we got to figure out how we're going to pay for it. But just saying, oh, well,
I think there's a difference when we think about that. I don't think it's, I think the required functions that have to be performed inside the waiver will be provided under the care coordination side. They have to be, that's what we're signing up for. I think what we're trying to do is make community guide into something that is a valuable service to support families in accessing services, help link people to more generic things to be on the ground. And it's a very important thing inside the waiver. My opinion is it's even more important outside the waiver is on the B3 side. And this will drive some of that B3. This is not that conversation here, but that's the other side.
So there's a comparable state definition.
There's a B3 service definition already for a community guide, but we will want to make this definition conform what that is, because that is an important component of the system.
Yeah.
We talked about that at the very beginning of these meetings. We heard it from people on every one of our stakeholder groups, not stakeholders, every one of our listening sessions, that if you're on a waiver, nobody will say everything's perfect. We're trying to adjust the waiver to make it much better, but there's a rich array of services that are available for people there. If you're not on a waiver and you're getting B3 services, this one becomes much more important because it's the ability to help people avoid the need for the larger, more service, to help people link generic resources when they're available, and to make sure that people are available to have a waiver slot when it becomes available by providing those other kinds of things. So I think it's, in many ways, this conversation transcends this waiver, but we need to get it right here. But I think, going back to the things that we have to do inside the waiver to meet CMS requirements around this part of it we have inside of the care coordination side.
Yeah.
This is an additional support to families.
But instead of in the B3 service area when we get there, instead of just mimicking what's here, we can add to it and make it more functional for those folks that are on.
All right, so Carrie can ask another question. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure you can.
My question has to do with this first paragraph. Community Guide Services also emphasizes, promotes, and coordinates the use of unpaid supports to address the individual's needs in addition to paid services. How are these unpaid supports vetted? Who's responsible for running these unpaid support persons through the Registry of Unmet Needs? Or who is responsible for seeing that these unpaid support persons have first aid and CPR training? Is that something the community guide is supposed to assist with, or is that a care coordinator? Is the unpaid support supposed to pay for the CPR and first aid?
Maybe there's a better way of saying unpaid support. Maybe we should coordinate the use of generic resources versus unpaid. Because I think you're right, when we call it unpaid supports, it implies there's a staff person. What we're really talking about is if community guide can help somebody access, why don't we say a gym membership versus Y, because always is Y. Or if somebody wants to, would like to access the community rec pool, how can the community guide help that linkage there? It's really not about a staff person. It's more about linking to those potential options.
But the individual needs a 12-hour-a-day volunteer in order to remain in the home of the individual's choice. So who's responsible if the community guide isn't the person who is supposed to assist with locating the unpaid supports to address the individual needs in addition to paid services? Well, who is responsible for that? Or supposed to help with that?
I think I'm missing your point. I'm serious, I think I'm missing your point.
Well, the point is, if this 12-hour limit on sets of services is going to remain going forward, then somebody is going to have to be responsible for locating those unpaid supports. I mean, you're just assuming that there's family who are relatives of some manner who are providing this unpaid supports. And I mean, we're at a complete loss with what to do. Where are these miracle volunteers for 12 hours a day, 365 days a year? And again, right now the community guide hasn't been able to locate anyone who's.
Cannot this?
See, I mean, the churches aren't willing to fork out for the CPR and the first aid. The church was dumbfounded at the question of, well, are you going to run this person through the registry for us? I mean, without a 12-hour-a-day volunteer, there's no choice.
Let me suggest to you, Mary, that this is not the place where that's going to happen, community guys. So we will put that in a different conversation. Okay. I think I get your point now. It wasn't about this.
So this should be.
But it says they're going to coordinate the use, so we need to remove that?
Service though, couldn't they? Community guide could maybe look at leaving to another service to the volunteer assignment, but then another provide like community networking can then work with the individual.
But if you've used up your hours, you don't have community networking.
I think what you're doing, Mary, I appreciate your point. I do. I'm not saying I don't, but that is not this definition.
Choice is choice, or choice isn't choice. And as I see it now, there isn't a choice.
Isn't a choice of what?
If If an individual doesn't have a 12-hour-a-day volunteer, then they don't get their choice. But the waiver says you get your choice. That's a lie.
What says get choice within the confines of the waiver, within the parameters?
The goal of the waiver, the goals of the waiver specifically say choice, home of your choice. That's a lie. It's only your choice if you have a 12-hour-a-day volunteer. If you don't have a 12-hour-a-day volunteer, then you don't have a choice.
I think I want to take it offline because I'm not sure I understand that point yet. Okay, so with that, then we're going to change to generic.
The generic resource.
Yeah, I think something like that.
And I don't want to acknowledge about requiring CPR for running through the
What else you got
registry.
on that, Ken?
I tried to ask hearing about
That's it for this one. Do you have any additions or
it. Why would I do
anything
that?
else you would like to see?
I haven't gone through the registry.
All right,
And
we're
if
going to
something
declare
happens, then his guardian, it comes back
done.
on me.
Next. Community network.
Wait a minute, you're finished with the resolution? I want to ask, just one. I'm sorry, I came in, I have a couple of questions, so.
Okay.
Just a couple on the actual definition itself. And you may have addressed this before, I'm sorry I was late, I wasn't remembering where the right building was. I will turn around here. It says it's mandatory for annual orientation on self-determination and self-direction. Did y'all cover that already?
We do not.
No, wait, that was the first part.
I did cover that.
It does seem odd.
And you said that was a community government?
Seems odd that every year you would have to pay somebody to annually orient you if you've been doing it all year. But remember, the purpose of the waiver is to employ bureaucrats, not to provide services.
More about self-determination, self-direction than I know right now. Than anybody could have.
You're going to work hard to find that person.
I doubt it. And I don't like being told what I'm going to do by anybody in government. Okay? So I'm fine. I understand there needs to be parameters. I understand there needs to be an economy to do it and scale and all that. I just really, it just doesn't feel like it's the spirit of everything we've talked about up to this point to make this service mandatory. Even if it's just one session, it's kind of have to spend with somebody on a topic that, at least in my family, I feel pretty sure we understand completely. And we don't choose to self-direct. And so it's like giving somebody an opportunity to do a sales pitch. Because now I got to pick which one of the three I want to come talk to me about it. And then I have a mandatory accept that. And I might rather spend my budget
True.
on a service.
True.
It's going to be meaningful for me, for my kids.
Excellent.
So, and so I have 3 kids, and so they all 3 have to get this one. You know what I'm saying? I'm not from a family that's got one. So I got to have this speech 3 times for the Autism Society.
As the rest of it, open up another. I'll start with, this is not inside the budget. So I think maybe the way we would go about this, because I think the point being is that we do believe most families would benefit from it. You are, I would hate to say that you're exceptional, but you're an exceptional family in relationship to knowledge about the work.
Absolutely don't disagree.
But I would argue that there are very few people in your circumstance. So maybe there is a way, and something we ought to think about, is there an opt-out ability for this?
Experience in lieu of.
Or is that it just
I like that.
every year, that if you went through it initially with the service, I get that, so that you're clearly aware of it when you first start the service, to know what it's about, that you hear that, but you can have to hear it every year, just because the years.
And we thought about it as too, as like assessing if you contact the person and you see other needs, and you can kind of help address those, but possibly not.
For pharmacist does, when you go to refill the prescription, do you want to hear the statement that on this bottle of pills that you've been getting for the last 6 years, or do you want to waive the requirement of that statement? So you're accountable, responsible, sign on the ballot.
And I'm all for the I tell you, I waited all the time, and I guarantee I should. There are things that I probably didn't know the first time, or at least have a shot at listening. So, but I think there's a
That kind of a direction, though, something that gives you a chance to review it, not have to get the same speech every time.
it's really good.
Is that assuming the waiver isn't going to change from year to year? Oh, sorry.
Maybe I could have said that, there are lots of people that, I actually do know lots of families who are very knowledgeable about this. I want the people that have never heard of it and don't understand it to get that education. It just seems a little bit heavy-handed.
Bureaucratic.
To expect it to be mandatory. I mean, if it's something that offers something, then people will want it. But today, it's struggle. I get it, struggle, Dave. I really do. I mean, I get it, but having to sit and listen to something like that, if it's not something you have capacity to do, the desire to do, it just doesn't seem, it's not considered.
Instead of annual.
What did you say, Bob?
When you get on
Why
board.
couldn't it be initial?
Right, part of the orientation, yeah, part of the orientation.
Well, and there's some updates as they come along, is there? I mean, yeah, there are changes.
Yeah, revisions.
All right, so if we can move on to the initial.
I do think, now, we have had in one circle, this is, I don't know what work group it was, very early on in this. They had a great discussion. I know Deb was there, I'm not sure who else. Sammy Ellsworth was still with us. And, a great discussion about a consumer orientation to the waiver for people. And they went on and a consumer handbook that really was very clear, which we had a hard time ever getting published on this current one we're on. And so I think it would be great to have something like this really thoroughly explained at the time, as an orientation to, you finally got that's what you sought after for so long. Now let's educate you about what that means. And a very great part about the self-determination and self-direction aspects of all the people. But it's really a one-time thing. And at revisions or updates.
So record a video.
Sorry. Does this also get you back to what you're saying is that you're trying to build some scale in this, and so if you do make it optional from year to year, or only when the changes are made, you still have
In
to
fact, for the annual orientation, watch a video and sign off on it.
I don't think we're trying to, I don't think this was the intention of getting scale. I think part of what we have to do a better job is working with the LME and COs of pushing scale on this. But I think that I would argue that one of the reasons why people don't have high quality folks that they hire is because if there's not scale, they can't afford to do it. And sort of that is the rate process. Part of it's the lack of one in some places just even density of service. But I think the more intention is we really wanted to educate, and that's the goal. But I think we're here pretty clearly. Initial, I would say initial, but available annually.
So the other comments that kind of what I think is from my knowledge and talking to stakeholders in ECBH and peer coordinators, some of the things that might be additional things that would attract people to this service, regardless of whether it was what funding stream is paying for it, it's certainly been an innovation. One of the things you hear all the time is this thing about loss case management or impact. And some of that is around doing those really more lengthy ELP or circle services, or circle friends. Those real person-centered process kinds of meetings. So in several of the definitions that the work group has brought forward, you had these sort of breakout little titles of services. And a familiar term, community guide, people know what the hell is that, but a familiar term that people do understand, I think, a lot in the system is support brokerage. And I intended support brokerage. And so one of the components that people really liked about the old case management before it was killed was the independent nature of it.
Yep.
That it was a disinterested group. They weren't for the NCOLE, or they weren't for they didn't provide direct services in many cases. They were truly an independent broker of things. So they didn't have a dog in the fight if it got authorized or didn't, or whatever. Their job was the person. And I personally liked that aspect of that as well on the who they were focused on. So having something, I would probably label it that, because then it bring that familiarity back into the system for people. You know, just my opinion about that. Something that would help people do these more elaborate plan processes and to help the consumer learn how to interview for staff, how to add what questions to ask when they're interviewing staff. Because even if you're not doing self-direction, you're still having to pick the people that are going to work with you. And a lot of times, you know, they get paraded in front of you. And if you haven't got experience interviewing people, you might not know what to ask. So and I don't mean any disrespect when I say this is more of my personal experience. So John brings the staff in, Cindy, this is Rose. I'd like you to meet Rose. This is all the stuff that Rose has done. And got 3 Roses coming in, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30 in my house, and I'm overwhelmed. And I don't ask the questions because I don't know how to even structure the interview. And he's a QP for a provider that's got 6 of me today to do this with all over this little area. I mean, that can get overwhelming and not structure it. Helping do all that, that's a great independent support brokerage kind of activity. Falls nicely into this service. You know, there are some others, notwithstanding the individual budgeting, if I'm, I'm going to need some help understanding this new resource allocation budget stuff. And how to ask for an EOD so I know where I'm at and spending it. What is the stuff I need to ask for? Some of these are things that is a service that is valuable, that isn't covered in the care coordination on the admin side of the waiver. That somebody's going to have to do. Negotiating rates, we get into that discussion. Whether there'll be flexibility about that or not, I know may still be sort of out there somewhere in the abyss, but let's say I can now negotiate the rate for personal care for my little boy who's got a feeding tube and may have a trade. I don't even know where to begin. Like, not only may I not know about self-direction, but I sure as hell don't know shit about cost modification. All right? But I know I need a nurse. And I know I need to ask for a nurse. Because I know that these HabTechs they keep running through don't know what they're doing. That would be something that a community guy could help me with if they knew what they were doing. In terms of how do I even begin that conversation about getting a rate, brokering that rate with this provider, making sure that it doesn't go into his profit line but goes into my staff's pocket so they stay with me. That retention piece, because a lot of times we get the rate, but none of it ends up in that direct care staff's pocketbook. That makes them want to keep working with my very difficult kid. Developing that emergency backup plan. So you guys may remember last week in our meeting, Ellen Carey brought up, what do I do when my wheelchair tire goes flat? Who do I call as the fire department, ambulance? Who do I call? Care coordinator, they're going to know how to fix my wheelchair tire. Having backup plans and emergency plans for things that aren't necessarily waiver related but life related. This kind of person might have the ability to help with that in a support brokerage kind of way. But not just thinking about the crisis that's mental health, but the crisis of life. My toilet's overflowed and I'm in a wheelchair, how do I fix that? At 1 in the morning, whatever it is, just saying.
So would it be fair to say
something like that?
You think, in terms of the types of activities that we described here, we would need more robust description of that in how we...
Yeah, and the individual support brokerage. I also think there's a little different role in system navigation.
I think one of the...
Which you fall in this too.
I do not disagree with that, what you're saying. I think the problem is that I'm not sure if we can make the big leap there now. I think we can make a leap, but I'm not sure we can make that full. And just say I'm not sure. And that has a lot to do with, because I think what you described is a significantly different rate than we're close to facing now. And I'm not saying it's not needed, I just think that it kind of flips a lot of the others that we're trying to do to make the biggest leap now.
Could you do levels though? Like a level 1 is this type of just basic need, and a level 2 is like more different type needs?
What I'd like to suggest is that we want to take it back. I very important things. Maybe come back, I think we have one more meeting with it, right, before we submit.
Oh, before we submit what we post, we were going to try and post next month.
Right, but we might try to, we
We'll
might have,
have to come back together after it comes down because we'll have all of that public comment together.
we might want to, if we don't get back before the public comment, before we post, because we want to put it in, we might send something out with maybe a broader concept of where we're trying to head with this for people on the waiver and not on the waiver, and add some of these things into it, but maybe not get as far as you want.
So what I would say is I absolutely could swallow mandatory if it included all of that.
You just saved a bunch of money.
Well, isn't it, I mean, making it non-mandatory might save money, but I think if it offered something, I could swallow it being mandatory if it offered more than what's on this paper right now, which is just a little, mandatory for education one time.
So, right, so what we were
That's not going to
hoping,
build the scale either.
what we were hoping though is that someone could come in, help assess, and then, you know, if the family had other needs, they could move into something more intensive, but I can see what you're saying.
I think a lot of places a support broker like that could be really helpful today.
And I think we heard from families during listening sessions and around this table at the very beginning when this definition originally came up that this really has no substantive value to most families. And I think we need to pay deep respect for that. And you know, if we do nothing more than change the name of this support in some way, people will be greatly relieved. And I hate to be so bold, but I think that folks have found this to be not a useful service. And we did talk about how do we strengthen that direct relationship.
So it's like new Coke.
That works so well.
But you get it, right? It's like new Coke. I mean, if you catch something that's so similar, people might have valued it, but you know, they don't sell new Coke anymore.
I still have some questions on exclusion number 1, some of the kind of things on care coordination. Some of the kinds of things, and I guess I see before someone is, and I'm talking about initial. Somehow in this, whether it's state-funded initial or innovations-funded initial, the third independent party, to me, is care coordination. And that is their role. And I don't see, at least initial. You know, I think this is, what's under number 1 here is very narrow. I guess it's out of the 42 CFR. Is that all 42 CFR 438 UOAC says? Are those the only functions that care coordination performs without federal requirements? Is there a way, so I'm just asking these questions. I mean, is there, I'm talking about on page 3 of this service definition, but it's looking number 1 at the bottom. You know, I know that we don't have target case management, and I think Cindy raises some good points. But initial, before the person chooses whether they're going to do, you know, what types of services they're going to do, before they have a support broker, there's got to be care coordination at the front end that does a lot of this education on what the system is and orientation. And, you know, if the care coordinators, if LVMCOs don't have the funds out of their current PM to do those functions, then we need to adjust it so that they can be done. But, you know, you hear an outcry, I think, from folks that need more guidance on the front end. They get to choose what types of services, you know, do they want to have a support broker and choice type services, or do they want to have agency type services? What are the benefits, what are not the benefits, etc. I think that has to be done, and I think that third party is, this independent is care coordination. I'm the only one who feels that way. That's how I think about it. I think we got a gap. And what I'm hoping for with my investment of time, that I'm hoping you guys hope for with your investment of time, on Friday afternoons over months, is that what we end up with is better than what we have today. So when we recognize the gap, I think we have to deal with that gap, talk about how we're going to fill it, talk about who's got the function, how we're going to pay for the function, have accountability for the performance of the function, that we all know and understand.
So I will like, the care coordination, absolutely front end, as you described it, that is their responsibility. But education about the waiver is, how do you go about it in ISP? All of those are going to be functions of the LMCO. We pay them to do that. I think the question, the way I would look at this is that there are things that people need that are at the community level that are linkage, coordination, educational opportunities that would be what people feel is missing from care coordination and what case management used to be. I think we cannot replicate case management. There's no intention of doing that. I think what we want to have is that we want to continue to involve community guide under whatever name we call it. Is that opportunity to provide that service or care. So what people have said back to us, I think, is what I hear pretty clearly is that the listing of things that we describe in here don't accurately reflect, I think, what we thought we were saying. Because I think we saw it as a bolder opportunity for people to get things, get things that they need from the service. And perhaps we missed some things in addition to that we should have had here. And I think that's the takeaway that I get, that we need to go back and do that. Changing the name is an interesting idea. I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't do that. But people are pretty smart, and so I don't think changing the name is the answer. The answer is making sure that the functions of what people need are provided, and if we understand how they get. And if changing the name helps us, then we should do that. But we have to start with the functions.
Okay, so a couple of things I want to make sure don't get missed because they're very relevant to this. So,
Unless I'm just getting here.
family, consumers and families have to participate in a lot of meetings, especially when you have children. You got IEPs, you got ISPs, you got office therapies, behavior support plans, doctors, etc. I mean, this just adds another meeting they have to participate in to get. I mean, that's a lot of burden on people. Number one. If we had this service as a mandatory service, then you have to figure out where in the timeline of events does it fit?
True.
And is there sufficient capacity? So when I look at my soon-to-be 24 county catchment area, there are 1,500 regular recipients from the Virginia line to the South Carolina line, is there enough community guides to make sure that we hit those required timeframes? And I can tell you today, there's absolutely not, unequivocally. So if it's a mandatory thing, but it doesn't happen because there's not sufficient capacity, but it's in the waiver, and there's no opt-out, what do we do? Because now I can't get my thing, I can't get anything because I didn't have this educational session because there wasn't sufficient capacity for me to get.
It becomes a barrier.
I hear that, that's fair. What I would, will add, just to remind our LMCO friends in the room, is that there are ways in which you can make this easier for providers to provide. You have enormous tools in your toolbox, including payment reform, that you can do. And so don't forget that opportunity with your providers. Because one of the things that does create a business problem is that if you try to do this on a reversible scale and you don't know what your numbers will be. So if there is a sense that somebody can get a sub-capitation to do some of this work, it might be wise to think about it, because you have a better chance of attracting higher quality staff to do it. So just a reminder, you have all the tools that you need. But your point is well taken. So the mandatory piece, I think we have to be cognizant of that. You probably need to look at where does that get from.
To add a little bit to Cindy and Bob, physical health, where are we putting that? Is that an ISP, or restricting the ISP, or would this be maybe?
You said we had
Yeah, we're having this conversation earlier.
So what I will tell you is that from all of our internal work around Medicaid reform, and in terms of
still not knowing what Medicaid reform will be. We know that we have to be very cautious in not providing duplicative care coordination services, both on the medical side and the behavioral health side. And you all probably know all of the politics involved in that and the cautions that we're all facing. It doesn't mean that we're not going to address it. It just means that I think we're still trying to, we all want to get out in front of what the legislature ultimately tells us to do around Medicaid reform and how we begin to think about those coordination efforts, because it may solve the problem for us or make it worse.
So I want to clarify what you said about getting how many MCOs in the room. So sure, there would be some incentives.
Well, it's not meant to,
Over
we
and
need to do
above.
an editorial comment.
Over
Not
and
for you to
above,
want.
what I'm saying, over and above what is currently offered by the state to incentivize providers to deliver services, which is sign up and deliver.
Saying, we had helped you.
I just want to ask this, just for my own sanity over the weekend, before I got these on Monday, is that, so let's say an MCO did decide to incentivize it, can they add additional requirements that aren't covered in the definition with their own money when they're incentivizing it? So that it is a value-added service, not just is? Because if I was going to enhance that and recommend that enhancement in the safety catchment area today, then I'd want to buy a whole lot more than this offer.
Great question. We would check that out, yes.
Right, because, you know, this is not something I would choose to purchase. As written today in this room.
Okay, enough editorial comment from both sides. Okay.
Just say. I love you, Dave, anyway.
Let the ministry's letter already.
I like it better when you and Bob were arguing back.
I know, right? It's not good to have something to say.
All right. How about community network? Anything else up in community guide? All right, Kenneth, you're on again. Not yet, because we're making a change.
So that's still the same. No one will ever come back.
Okay. What is community networking? And just the basic premise is that it's individual activities in integrated settings. It can be used to refer and link a person to a paid supports once they are connected. So that's what we talked about in our community guide section. It's designed to provide maximum participation in the person's community. So it's a community-based service. What does it include? Individual group. It also can allow for classes and conferences and for transportation. And why is it important? It assists people to access and be supported in the community, increases self-determination, and assists people in exploring what they like and exploring things that they might like in their life. So not just what their current needs and likes are. And that's the basic service. You have the definition here. Again, it's to be in integrated settings, so with everybody in your own community, the community that you live. It's not supposed to take place in licensed facilities. It can allow you to go to adult education, to take college classes, volunteer work, things like that. You can also pay for classes and conferences. We changed a little bit that it can include memberships as well, as long as those memberships are used for some type of class in the community. Like if you're going to the YMCA, you're going to go to a yoga class or something, but the membership is basically the class. So that was an issue before. We heard from feedback. So that's basically it. The classes and the conferences will not exceed $1,000. So whatever class, as long as it's integrated, we feel like would be appropriate. Then transportation, the transportation section is that it's used when you transport somewhere and you don't need support person in the community. So it's a little bit, once you become more independent, you can access that transportation component.
So when you talk about number 11, that payment for memberships, what is the vision around, let's say it's an adult who wants to take that yoga class and it's $65 a month. Are you saying that $65 a month for the yoga class can be reimbursed under this service? Is that what that means? Okay, so how?
What do you mean how?
How does that reimbursement happen?
When it
How's
comes
the claim
from-
filed? How's it processed? Because it's a different thing for 5 million different possibilities at least. And so does the provider pay that $65 and then file a claim to the MCO and then reimburses the provider? Is it, we're going to use a trash can code of some kind or something, or is it going to be a whole bunch of, I mean, how do you see that happening?
It has its own modifier now.
Modifier.
It does?
But it's
For
done,
those in conference,
it's done under conference. So I think
That's,
Okay,
yes,
so the-
it's not, it's very underutilized, right? I would guess
very.
very underutilized, because it's, who's gonna front the money and wait for the
29
reimbursement?
people used it for waiver year 13.
Right. How many?
29.
Out of
Many.
12,000.
Right, and so that's why I'm asking this question, because it is a very challenging thing to sort out who does what and how it gets filed and gets reimbursed and all that whole process, you know. So I think it's great, I love it, but you have to be real clear on
Okay.
how that claim
That makes
gets
sense.
filed, who fronts the money, does the MCO front the money, you know?
First the authorization, you're going to be asking for authorization for it. So a unit of it is going to be authorized to the provider agency.
Right.
So if you're the
Yoga?
2015
Everything will have a unique rate.
It
To the
has its
person.
own, yes, it has its own modifier. So do you want it to go through like we do with the natural supports education where you're approving X amount for a conference?
And then, but you only pay the amount that they spend, right? I mean, it becomes a reconciliation nightmare. It's the way that it works in natural supports education, one of the reasons it's not used, probably, I guess, except for those people who are extreme advocates for that resource, it just won't get used, not unlike community. It won't, and I think it's a great thing, but figuring that out on the front end
Will make people.
is going to, you know, because the question will be, well, how does that work? You know, so the consumer front it, and the provider claims it, and then they pay the consumer when they get paid. You know, how does all of that work? Because these are the 9 different ways that Carrie's talking about it gets done today.
Well, some of the successful ones are being done now.
What do you think, Carrie?
And I think it's about more education for our conference.
I agree with you.
For instance, you know, because I know that it was very different for families, it was burdensome for them to front money. For us, it wasn't a big deal, but for a small yoga studio, it is going to be a big deal. You know what I mean? To have to wait 90 days to get reimbursed. So
I think it's appropriate to do it through the provider. I mean, it would be, the MCOs, I think, should use their number and do it with purchase orders.
Like they do home lines and they do home lines.
yeah, that would be.
Right.
I think that's the easiest way to do it.
But I would like the group to process that process and understand that, because I don't know that ever really happened that great in natural sports education, which is why it's so underutilized.
No, I don't know if that's necessarily, the process doesn't necessarily go into the
No.
definition. So we need something that comes after this.
Like the
When we
consumer.
agree that this is what we're putting in, that may be one of the things we do when we come back together, is to say, okay, what are the operational issues that we have with this?
It's a big one.
And put it together, because it's a great opportunity, though. I mean, for people who, yeah.
I like it, it is an operation.
We will definitely work on that.
If it were an annual membership, at the yoga class, $65, and the annual memberships, you put in the plan, it starts at $780, and you would bill it under the code for $780, and get pay the yoga studio. But when it gets monthly, that's a different deal.
Or
Or
if they
what?
want to stay on, right, right.
But if you pay 780 and they do 2 months and quit.
I know, right? All these details. Details. That's what matters.
Well, that is life.
You get reimbursed?
Well, you know, I'd rather have the challenge of sorting this out than not having the option to actually sort it out. Because so many people can't, you know, I don't want to take an integrated class because those old content classes.
Well, thanks for all the people on the waiting list. I'm so glad I'm on the waiting list while everyone else is paid yoga instruction.
You don't have to cover the cost up front because so many of them don't have the money to pay up front and to cover that.
Because there are a couple of them here for course education, not for this one, because you're required.
Oh my God. There's a charity that would do that.
And I don't know if this is necessary or not, but in the narrative there, it says it does not replace a licensed facility, but it can still be provided by a licensed provider who will use it in combination with something like day support. If someone is out volunteering, I don't know if that has to be specified that way or.
Basically, I think what we got a lot that I've gotten called since we started using community networking is, but we want to volunteer in the nursing home. The nursing home is a
One of those
licensed
things they could pay for.
It's not a facility that's providing wage services. It's not a day support program. You are not
No,
volunteering
but she gets
at
transportation.
where you live.
Again, Buffalo doesn't
But if you go to a
have
nursing
been
home
transported
or
to and
hospital
from Dogwood.
and volunteer like the rest of us,
If she has community networking.
Okay, Kenneth, move on.
Oh,
So that's it.
We're done answering questions.
I just reading the last sentence in the recommendation, the narrative for the definition, says, as individuals gain skill and increase community connections, service hours should pay, however, a formal pay plan is not required. I don't know, and I'm not as familiar with community networking, same with some of the other services we talked about, but it seems to me that anytime we put a should, there's an expectation of will. Yeah. However, it's not required, so we put it should pay, but it's not required, so we put two conditions in here that may be in conflict with each other, maybe not in the verbiage of how it's presented here, but certainly how it's going to be interpreted when it comes to somebody sitting down and saying, okay, how do we manage this service? Either the hours are going to stay based on some set criteria, or we got to mold this on, and that now that we've trained here, we're helping work through some of these issues, we're just not going to provide the service anymore. I mean, there's some questions on how that's.
I think to give us points, so I think the goal is, is that obviously, if you're someplace where phasing makes sense, you want to encourage.
Right.
But you don't want to create a UR expectation of a timeliness of how that phasing is going to happen. So probably, just have to think that wording a little bit.
Should be.
You could incentivize it with a financial bonus for the person receiving the services. By not getting.
Well, eventually we're just going to say, well, it's handled.
I like that.
I think that's a very good point, is that, so we don't put something in the service definition that puts undue pressure on the UR side to. Yes,
I have a question. Is this...
You have to turn the camera on you.
No. Is the... get your own camera on your own YouTube site. I've told you that, Dave. So, community networking originally allowed relatives to perform this service. And my families, the severe and profound end, again, were concerned when it was taken away that the relative couldn't provide community networking, because now what happens is this staff person, the community networking staff, is taking the individual out into the community in order to develop meaningful community relationships with non-disabled individuals that the relative or the family wouldn't have any knowledge of or any vetting of. Again, that whole abuse registry thing comes up, and so is this going to still remain? The conversation with two different families, it happened like, well, if the relative could go out and, read my relative's reaction to these community settings, this community networking, right? Then if the staff came in and did it just, and so they dropped community networking because they couldn't vet it.
I don't think it was dropped because it wasn't able to be vetted. I think it was to allow for an integrated opportunity in the community.
But it's some staff person deciding, and again, I'm looking at this from the total severe and profound end of this spectrum. Not Katie, you can't, if you took Katie as her community network provider and went to the local food pantry to find out if Katie could volunteer at the food pantry, well, why am I supposed to trust your judgment? And Katie can't tell me what you saw or what she saw or what happened. I mean...
And I don't think it's a matter of people just coming up on the fly, and today is Tuesday, so we're going to drive around until we find something to do. It's a mindful... The community guide sometimes has sat down and found, what are you interested in? I really like things that are textured, so I want to take pottery, I want to take art, I want to do X, Y, or Z in conjunction with the individual and the family. And then the qualified professional is also following up on that staff member, so it's like any other service that you provide.
Let me make sure I understand this. So I took Pinky to my book club last night. And because I'm her sister and guardian, that didn't count as her participating in an integrated experience?
I'm sorry, I had a sidebar for a second.
Sorry about that. I took Pinky with me to my book club meeting last night. So if I understand what this definition or what Mary's saying about relatives not being able to do that, does that mean that because I took her, that wasn't a networking with non-disabled people? That wouldn't count?
No, I don't think it's a matter of that wouldn't count, but were you paid to do it? Is this the goal that she is going to...
Oh, it only counts if I'm paid to do it? No, I did it as a volunteer.
We're talking about the service. The service is to provide community networking. It doesn't mean you have to have the service and get paid for it to go out and do it.
Okay.
So my son is profoundly, my oldest son is as well. And if I could answer this, so we take him out in the community and do things all the time. We're not paid.
Right.
They are community integration, and and he still can do that. Being on the waiver doesn't prohibit him.
Right.
It just means that if I wanted to get paid, then it needs to be something that's in his plan that we have, as a team, decided is what he would choose. He would never choose to go to a book club. Is this Pinky? I've not met Pinky before. Nice to meet you, Pinky. Would Pinky decide to go to a book club if that's something that she would be interested in doing? Maybe couldn't ascertain that, I don't know.
If there's food there, I guarantee it.
So maybe that would be in her plan, and if it is in her plan and she got, and somebody took her to do something she chose to do, and that was community networking, maybe so. It could be. But is the question, could you get paid to do that?
I mean, why wouldn't I get paid to do that? I mean, it's an okay experience if I'm not paid, but since I'm her guardian and
sister. Well, I think it depends on what the parameters of the waiver are. So is community networking something a relative as a provider can do? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Under the waiver right now, no.
Right now, no. So
initially it was there, and then they took it away, and so the service got dropped.
Right. And so are you petitioning that it should be added back? Is that the thing you're asking for?
Yes.
And so one of the things that...
And again, looking forward to the point in time when it's not you and me as parents, it is siblings.
So let me just say this.
So this idea of relatives...
Kids that'll be those siblings one day. But let me tell you sort of my perspective on that. And I don't mind sharing this. I don't think... I appreciate your advocacy, I do. At the same time, I think there has to be some services that are done by people other than me as a family member, because my son Cameron performs a lot differently for other people than he does for me. And sometimes he needs an opportunity to be separated from me to do that. And while I also appreciate your advocacy, I think, we're not relatives provider because I can't be one, because I work as an MCO person. The other side of that coin, though, I think it's good, it's healthy to have other options, because there are services you can provide, right?
Well, and you can only go through so many abuses by staff before you decide, oh, that really wasn't a great experience for her.
I've been there too. But I think you have
So
to
don't
understand-
say that using unrelated staff is the preferred method either, because it's not for everybody.
This is the other thing I would say, my position on it is that I think that when you accept the services, you accept that it also has limitations in the public system, and you can't expect the public system to do everything for you. And it will never be that way. So you can choose not to get any of it, or you can choose to accept the limits it has.
I'd like to say two things to what you just said.
Go ahead.
Because I just want to do parameters here in terms of how we have conversations. That exchange is very helpful to have that conversation going back and forth. I think we have heard clearly that there is from Mary and Paula and I'm sure others
You
that
just
say
pretend
that
that there's miracle great staff.
community network under wireless provider. I think we will take that back. I'm not so sure we will make the decision to say yes to that, but we will take that back.
Well, you know who you're punishing the most, I assume, with that, is people who live in rural areas.
Hello.
I mean, if there's a dearth of staff in urban areas, there's a more scarcity of staff in rural areas. That's one thing. And the other thing, Cindy was talking about how, in a public system, you can't have everything. I got to tell you, some of these things that you all are talking about that taxpayers are funding, it's very distasteful to me, because some of these things are people who pay taxes can't afford to do. So, I'd like for you all to go back and redress that and decide which things are reasonable that you would expect charities to do. There are a lot of charitable people in this world.
Okay, so that's a very good point.
And there are people on the waiting list.
I have a suggestion that may address the over-URing this thing to that.
And I have my lottery tickets in my
the last
purse.
sentence where it talks about needing skills and connections and the issue of fading, it may be helpful to have an additional sentence in there that says, if fading is not possible or non-paid connections are not established, then the new community living service definition may be more appropriate. So I think it's if you've exhausted the spirit of one definition, you may include some suggestions of where to direct that same service time somewhere else. Because I think
and if you had a good care coordinator,
locked up in the language of the definition and then think that means you can't have anything, when in fact it's the work that's been done by this group and others on the new community living definition. There's some flexibility there. And so you could still have the support in place. Family members could still be able to provide those services. But I think the spirit of this definition, if there's a spirit of fading to it at all, is that people are building networks that aren't developed yet. And the network of their family is a network that is already developed.
That's fair. And one thing to remember is that so we're going to a individualized budget process. So some of the back-end UR issues we're going to resolve that in the first place. So your point well taken is that you fade out of this service doesn't mean that you lose the service capability, because you may not be making something else. I do want to, Mary, since you got the camera on, I want to go back. I do want to, I would say that there are multiple competing interests in public policy. And that really is what we're trying to do in a setting that is, I think, extraordinarily open in that effort to try to develop public policy. There's a competing interest, as I think Paulo brought up, and very appropriately, of what we as the state should expect taxpayers to pay. And that is an absolute consideration, and that is something that I think everybody struggles with that level. There's a competing interest of the title of this waiver. It's not the innovations waiver that's important. It's the home and community-based waiver.
Home.
And that's correct. And the intention of what home and community-based has meant all along in terms of what the new standards are,
Because new standards don't just address size and where people live, they address really community integration. And trying to balance what that means, and I think it is a question about what that means in terms of individuals and their level of understanding and their severity of disability of how they interact with community. But I think the spirit of that is community, and I think that all of us would agree that in the for an adult, in the best of circumstances, to not always have the same individual providing services is a better option. Now, we understand, and the reason why North Carolina allows for relatives as providers is because we understand that there are circumstances when the relative as the provider is the best option for that individual. But it doesn't take away our obligation to try everything we can to help people have other options beyond just relative. And that's not just, that is a beneficiary value that we have. It's for the individual, because that's what the waiver is for. But I also think it is a value for families to have some comfort that the state is not going to say the only option is mom, dad, or relative, that we have an obligation to continue to work toward a robust workforce that can do what we hear clearly that sometimes doesn't happen where you have a quality workplace. So that's the balance that we're trying to get. It's not, and I will say, from the state's perspective, in terms of relatives as providers, I think we've come to the position that we believe that is a viable option with inside this waiver. There will be limits, and we'll have to have limits on that. But it is a viable option that we want to make sure continues. But we have an obligation on behalf of CMS, on behalf of the state, and the taxpayer to make sure that we're trying to live to the spirit of what the waiver has, which is also assuring that people have other options than just families. So
CMS doesn't put limits on relatives as providers for adults. None. None.
Paul?
I just, this bias against family as provider has just driven me nuts over years. Oh, yes, there is. First of all of this is a clear bias toward people who are higher functioning. All right, that's fine. But let's make sure that we do include differences for people who aren't as high functioning. I mean, did Pinky get anything out of the book topic last night? No. Did she get something out of everybody Googling over her and getting good stuff to eat, especially dessert? It was wonderful. Yeah, she loved that. Somebody else might be a higher functioning person would get something different from that experience. So I think you have to allow that, guardians or whomever knows the person best, give them some flexibility about what integration to that person really means. That's one thing. What was the other thing?
Well, I think John is going to help prompt what you're going to say.
Well, just to kind of follow up on my first question, which launched this whole discussion in the first place. The last sentence states that there's an intention or there's an assumption that the need is going to diminish over time.
Right, fade.
But we already know that we have an aging population that as that requirement diminishes at some point, we're going to start swinging back the other direction. To make it simple, I would just drop the whole sentence.
I think we've got to take this back into consideration, but I also want to remind people that you can't look at one service definition in isolation. That's what you're going to say. There is a wide variety. It might be that this service, there is an assumption that it's designed to go into some place and hopefully can pay for it time. But I think we've got to be cautious on how strict we are with this. So we're going to take
It was rate driven.
For instance, if we're talking about paying for memberships, an aging population, being involved in classes where I'm active and exercising and doing things, that would fit that requirement where, before I may have been involved in work or whatever other activities, but as I get older, maybe I want to slow down with that, maybe I want to go to the dance class and I sign up for that. Is that covered under the service definition? Again, there's an assumption as aging occurs that my activity level in one way is going to change and increase or diminish in other ways. So I think we just need to make sure that the definition doesn't limit that understanding.
I think it's a great point, and again, I think part of what we are trying to do, and we are all together in this, is we're rethinking about how you live inside of a process we describe an individual budget. Some of these items we may not need to be as prescriptive about, because you will make decisions about what you can and can't choose based upon that budget. So I think in that vein, I think that we'll take that back to think about. Let me go to Gina. Not Paul.
Yeah.
I need just a couple of clarifications. Is this, I don't have the other definition at forefront for community networking, is this more flexible than the other definition that seems less prescribed as far as, you know, riding public transportation, if I'm learning how to ride the bus, my care coordinator, you know, can't see I'm at this XYZ bus stop on Wednesday. You know, it's real prescribed right now. We're supposed to be where you're supposed to be every Wednesday. Is it going to be more flexible?
It should be more flexible, and like we always talked about, the UR policy that would be softer on the front end, it wouldn't be as prescriptive.
And then talk about transportation, the transportation component.
So, and I touched on that briefly. So transportation is fairly prescriptive in its definition. It's when the activity does not include staffing support and the destination transportation is an integrated community setting. So if someone already made their connections, we say maybe they had community networking, they became very independent, they feel like they don't need or want staff anymore, and that transportation will get them to those activities.
A taxi, an agency, who's going to do, who does the billing?
Well, I have to think about that. I mean, I think that it could be used as payment for like a taxi or the agency.
It's pretty expensive as a capital.
There's no cap on the transportation.
That would be part of the budget, I guess, and then, and it goes back to the same thing, however, we figure out how you're gonna buy those services as far as yoga classes, things like that, you would have to figure out how you're gonna purchase the
So I
transportation.
it might be a good idea to come up with some basic flow charts of how those things might operate, and then see if they make sense, or we can start working on them.
Now, I don't have the community living and support definition in front of me, but does that one too, just going back to what you were saying, how they can transition between, if I'm really not fading, does community living and support, the only thing that functions at Blue, does it still allow to purchase things within that for the, like the yoga membership, things like that, does that allow that?
It doesn't, but that would be independent of this. You could still use community networking to purchase that and be supported.
That would be my question.
Yeah, so it's an integrated activity.
Okay, I'm just would be my
It's
question.
more of a tool or fund.
But the staffing, I usually why I did it would then go under community living and support and not that.
Right. The way that we think about the three components of this definition is the community networking is the staffing and skill building component. The class and conference is a participation purchase component, and then transportation is a purchase component.
Paula.
I remember my 60-year-old memory is not as good as it was when it was 30. The rationale behind limiting the services that parents can provide relatives to provide is because we want people to have a broader experience with a wider range of people, right? Pinky pretty much has the same staff all the time. So are we going to randomly assign new staff to her all the time so that she has a wider range of people to deal with?
I think it's really important to remember these things, and this is a clarity. This is a waiver of the ICF level of care, and ICF is a much higher level of care and it requires very different kinds of rules and regulations. So as much as we want to, and I understand what you're trying to say, as much as you want to compare the two, the waiver requires different things. So I don't think you can do apples to apples.
CMS doesn't require staff turnover.
Sorry?
Does CMS require staff turnover
No,
in a waiver? Whether it's the residential support service definition or the AFL?
So what I will say to both Paul and everybody else is we have heard that and we're going to take that into consideration.
I'm glad.
And I did remember a point about community networking and the fact that isn't the rate of community networking higher than personal care? And is it the same as in-home skill building?
Yeah, I would assume it is higher than personal care.
And that's why some families were using community networking, because they got all of their in-home skill building hours, and that enabled a certain level of staff, you know. But when you have PC staff, that's where the high turnover occurs. But if you have staff who does in-home skill building or community networking, they tend to stay around longer. It's not in every 90-day transition period where the relative has to provide free training for the staff. You know, because I've had that conversation too, that if I'm not going to be allowed to work and I'm going to have to use staff, well, who's going to pay for the training of staff? Because I charge $500 per 15-minute unit to train.
Pretty good rate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why the service provider is having such difficulty locating alternate staff. They can't afford the training. Yeah.
So this has the reference to limits on sets. I thought we had some conversation about eliminating limits on sets. It's referenced in the code of instruction. It says limits on sets of services. I'm not sure why we need to limit the set of services when we're already limiting the budget. Why is that in?
We've just been using it as kind of a reference in case we put something else there, because we don't know what's going to happen. And that wouldn't be our group's kind of decisions.
Maybe part of my ignorance, which is very likely, but I'm looking at the item on transportation. Why can't we take some of what we, because I know we can't do transportation for non-medical emergency services in supported employment, and some of the others we talked about that last week. Why can't we use the transportation portion here, expand it to meet that particular demand, or is it required that, is this definition locked hard into the CMS definition, or can we take and create a transportation component, particularly in rural communities where placing somebody in a job may mean I'm taking you 20 miles from where you live to where the work location is. This allows that kind of activity under certain circumstances, but it's fairly limited. But the conversation we had the other day, unless we're talking non-medical emergency transport, you can't do that, particularly with, you know, there's no money for transportation, and yet can you take and create, in effect, crossover where we can apply some of this to some of that.
We're just going to call it community networking.
Where it's needed.
So Deb, write it down.
And we actually talked about that briefly on Wednesday.
Transportation is
See how
so
we could
big.
possibly fit into the other definitions.
It just seems like and I don't know what the boundaries are.
Activity, integrated employment.
Yeah.
Right, because that's the definition of supported.
I mean, here, the only problem in this definition here is when the activity does not include staffing support and the destination of the transport is an integrated community setting, that works. If it doesn't include staffing support, you know, if you have a group van where you may have 3 or 4 people within your catchment area that you're working with and say, I want to put you in a van, we're going to take you 20 miles from where the work is. Well, all of a sudden we've just excluded them from this particular definition because we now have staff involved. But if we adjusted that, and I mean, how do you define staff in that particular
Can your staff be the driver?
Or can we call that person something else? Now makes it
Let's call her
me.
the driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
I've got nothing creative left in me.
All right.
We're going to do something.
Okay, so I think.
How do we get in on it? How do we get in on it?
On this service.
Just a question on page 2, under exclusions, the 5th one. It's not weekday or furnished, and cannot be claimed at the same time of day as those services do. So none of those staff can support the person in using this.
All right, you don't.
It's not the exact same
Don't bill it at the same time.
So I
You
can't.
can double dip. So,
So I
I
can
can do it later.
so
Clock in, clock out.
consecutively we could, but concurrently we could not.
Correct.
Exactly.
On that note,
I like that.
We're going to take 5 minutes.
Okay.
Because y'all have exhausted the period of time to get these, and you're blowing the theory about getting out early. Second.